yesterday about if a system had like a restriction, how we were supposed to approach it, how we were supposed to service it, um, and so forth. Um, oh, Juan sent me a picture. He distracted me there. Um, so we need to talk about ice. Okay, wait a minute. There we go. I can block this notification so it don't come out now. Okay, so we need to talk about ice. We looked at those pictures, and I'll bring them back up again just to remind you guys. Um, when we looked at this, we looked at the evaporator, and we looked at these different pictures here of frost buildup on the evaporator. And the one key word here that I'm using is frost, because when people look at a refrigerator, you have to identify what type of ice you're looking at. And there's going to be two main types of ice. All of these that you're seeing here are what we call frost. And basically frost looks like snow. It looks like white, flaky snow where this has accumulated over a period of time. And this is usually indication of a sealed system problem or a defrosting problem. But we have other types of ice. I wasn't able to find any good pictures of it, but look at some of these evaporators. Look at this one right here. What do you think is the problem with this picture here on the left? Is that a sealed system problem or a defrost? Very good. That's a defrosting problem because it's the entire evaporator. It's not just a portion of the evaporator. What do you think about the top right picture? Do you think that's a defrost or another type of problem?
Another defrost problem?
Yeah, and in all these pictures, this one here also is a defrost problem. Both these two on the right, these are what they call manual defrost units. The evaporator is called a shell evaporator, and it wraps all the way around the food and does not have a defrost heater, so you have to manually defrost it. Now, the other type of ice you're going to see is not a frost ice. It's almost like ice cubes, almost like a clear ice. Let me go back a little bit where I had some pictures here that I just uploaded. And if you look at this, is this a defrost problem? Now, it is frost. It's not ice. I mean, it is a type of ice, a frosted ice, but it's not solid ice. But do you think that this is a defrosted problem? Yes? No?
Yes, it can.
Actually, no, this is not a defrost problem. This is a door seal problem where warm air is getting in, because what this piece here is in the middle and up and around here, there's no evaporator here. It's behind these shelves, the evaporator. A defrost problem wouldn't make ice go all the way from the back of the freezer to the front where the door seals. So what you're looking at here is that apparently warm air was getting in somewhere in the unit, and it most likely was coming in at the top because the majority of your ice appears here at the top, and you don't have as much at the bottom. And then when it gets thick enough, it'll push the door open and make it even worse. So this is not a sealed system problem. This is more of a hold on one second. Hello, Pedro. So this is not a defrost problem. This is more of a door seal problem. I didn't get a chance to upload it. One of my technicians sent me one hanging from the ice bucket where the dispenser was. And that's an image where the dispenser flap, where the ice comes out the door to your cup, the chute, that ice flap opens to let the ice out, and then they have what they call delay mechanisms on that flap. Why do you think there's a delay mechanism on the door flap where the ice comes out for your cup? You know, when you put your cup for ice and water? Why do you think there's a delay mechanism on that device?
To avoid cactus on the way out.
Yes, it keeps the door open for 10, 20 seconds after you removed your glass, so that if there's any more cubes coming out, they will fall out and not get trapped between the flap and the door. So you have to wait a few seconds. Some of them are real slow, like Whirlpool has like it's a little gear driven motor. It's not even electrical, but when you stop pressing with your cup, the plastic lever moves away and then it slowly allows the unit to close back up. But there are others like Frigidaire Electrolux. They have an electronic solenoid. And when you put your cup there, you'll hear the door slam open. And when you take your cup away, you won't hear nothing right away. And after about 10, 20 seconds, you'll hear the door slam shut. And that's to keep the ice from coming out. So let's look at this. No, not this picture, sorry. This here, what am I looking at? Does anybody have an idea what this is? That's the wrong, someone's trying to get in. Let me see if I can let him in. Hello, Hadi. So what do you think this is here?
Drain.
Yeah, that's the defrost drain pan. The defrost drain pan, did someone type something? I didn't get a chance to see it.
Yes.
I can't see chat messages while I'm presenting. Okay, so if you're looking at this drain, the drain line is frozen. Now, this could happen from many different things. It could happen from water slowly seeping out and starting to freeze, or it could be that some food or plastic or something got in the way of the unit and it blocked up that opening. Um, so on this unit, how do you clear that defrost out? How do you clear that defrost drain line out? If you try to use like a heat gun or a hair dryer, you're going to be there for days. What I like to do is I like to pour warm water. I'll put water in the microwave and let that water melt that, and I'll take my finger and keep tapping it with my finger to speed up the transfer of temperature from the ice to the water so that will melt. Once you get enough out, you can drain it. Now, someone had bent this lip down. It should be lifted up. But when this happens and it goes into defrost, it runs out the front. I think what we're looking at right here looks almost like there's ice right here. It's a little hard to tell, but that right there is probably where the water went forward and froze in the freezer. So defrost problems are not always around the evaporator. They could be appearing on the front panel, or frost patterns could be appearing on the very front like this here. So you're going to have to identify the type of ice. I've seen on a side-by-side unit where the ice maker is on the left-hand wall, and there's a tube that comes out of the back wall and feeds the ice maker water every time it calls for water. But that water was splashing down and getting onto the evaporator, causing the evaporator to freeze up. The technician that saw the ice saw ice only in one portion of the evaporator, and usually when you see ice build up on one portion, you think it's a restriction. In this case, it was water that was dripping from the ice maker and then freezing down in the evaporator. But the way you could tell that it was not a sealed system problem is it was not frosted ice like this on the evaporator, and it was a clear type of ice. So this ice here is from warm air and the humidity in that air freezing. Clear ice is actually water that had frozen, and we would run into defrost problems. Now, we've talked about this component here. This is a damper. This damper goes between the freezer and refrigerator section, and it helps keep the freezer air from going into the fridge too fast. I have seen in many refrigerators that white frost has built up around this opening here, and not allowing the freezer air to enter the refrigerator. So the customer calls you out and says, my freezer's cooling good, but my milk is spoiled, my refrigerator's not cooling. And so first response is, well, either I have a defrost problem or a sealed system problem. So let me look at my evaporator. They look in the front of the unit, and if you looked at the front of a side-by-side unit, you can see an opening and you can see the coils and see if ice is built up on those coils, and you don't see ice. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Do I have a sealed system problem? Well, what was it that I said the customer said was happening here? What did the customer say was wrong with the unit? Anybody? Well, the customer was stating that the freezer was cooling fine. They were making ice, which means we have at least 18 degrees or colder, and the refrigerator was the part that was going bad. Most likely, if we're making or producing ice, we might not have a sealed system problem. I mean, we could, but it's most likely not. That's when you want to look at this damper in the middle wall between the refrigerator and the freezer. It's also on French doors. And make sure that this is not frosted up. On Whirlpools, that closer mechanism that I had, excuse me, that closer mechanism for the dispenser door, as they get old or the plastic breaks, sometimes that doesn't close all the way, and that lets warm air into the freezer. And when it comes in, the fan blows it up into this opening here and builds this up with ice. So if you see the damper frosted with ice, assume warm air is getting into your freezer and causing that moisture and that frost to build up there in that damper assembly. So just removing the ice here will get the customer cooling, but it might have not completely fixed the problem. Why did the ice get there in the first place? So we have to look at the different types of ice to determine whether it's a sealed system problem or it's a restriction, it's a defrost problem, is it a door gasket problem, or is it a seal problem? So I have one or two quick videos here that I wanted to show you. Let me just go ahead and open this up. This one here. Let's take a look at it here.
Good morning, guys. If your freezer looks like this, with
Okay, what do you see there? What type of ice buildup? Is that a defrost problem?
White ice.
That is white ice. It's a frost. It's not a clear ice. But do you think that's a defrosting problem? I'm sorry, Pedro, I cut you off.
No, I'm frosty.
You're frosty. Okay. Well, let's see what the guy did to fix
frost
this
coming
problem.
back unusually quickly after a defrost cycle, then this video is for you. Now, there are different names for this ice. Some people call it sugar snow, or some people call it hoarfrost, but basically it's formed by the direct deposition from water in the air into a solid without going through a liquid phase first. If it goes from solid to air, it's called sublimation. A real sexy and unique name. But the opposite is called...
He said solid to air. I think what he meant, did it go from moisture to solid or liquid to solid? Or did it go from moisture to frost?
deposition. A word I hate because it has so many other meanings. Now here's something else that's interesting. If you look at this stand-up freezer, you'll see there's very little frost down here. And as you go up in the freezer, the amount of frost progressively increases. Now the first thing that is likely to go through your mind in this situation is whether or not this freezer is recent enough to have a defrost cycle. As it turns out, this freezer is a couple of decades old, and so there's no...
All right. He's looking for a defrost cycle in this unit. And a defrost cycle would not build up that much ice towards the front of the door. It would all be wrapped around the evaporator. And on these types of units, the evaporator is at the back, in the very bottom back of the freezer. So you would have not seen ice build up at the top of the unit, especially all over the shelves, unless it's what we call a shelf evaporator. And I'll show you one of those in a minute.
No defrost cycle here. So we've clearly got a problem of warm air entering our freezer somehow. Now, one of the commonest problems is to have a piece of food that's pressed up against the door so it can't shut properly, but this door seems to shut just fine. The second thing we look for is we look for this strip here to see if there's any gap that allows air to get inside. And let's just follow this down here. And what you can see is right there, air is getting in. There's a big crack, and I can feel that on the bottom as well, just in this lower left-hand corner. Now, that could be one of two problems. It could be a problem with the weather stripping itself, which has a magnetic strip inside. As it gets older, it gets less pliable, and of course when water freezes in there, it doesn't move. But the second thing that can happen is that these doors aren't made very well, and so they tend to be pretty floppy. And so it could be that the door has just been pulled out of square. How are we going to fix that? Now, if you go inside the door itself, what you'll see is that the weather stripping is actually held on with these screws. And these screws also hold the inner door panel onto the outer door panel. And so I'm going to first remove all of the components.
Okay, let me, someone else tried to come in. Let me see if I can let them in here. I think someone came in. Javon. Hello, Javon. Okay, so let's go back to that video, this one here. First of all, what he showed you with those screws holding the gasket on the door, that is correct, but this is on older units. Units made in the past few years, they don't even have screws. They liquid inject insulation in between the plastic liner that we're looking at right here and the metal part of the door. And the gasket's just pressed into a channel. There are no screws. There is no adjustment. Now, he's saying he's going to take everything off of the shelves here. That's not needed. All he needed to do was loosen the screws on the door let me just see if I could use my drawing tool for a second just to show you. If you had the freezer opening here, and I'm just going to draw it a little bit at an angle here if I can. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Let's say the door is here. Okay, the door is open. Okay, and this part of the door is not sealing. Well, from about here all the way around to here, all I would do is get my drill or my screwdriver and turn every one of the screws from about halfway point all the way up to this point here, and just turn them a couple of turns till they're loose. Not so loose that they're going to fall out of the door and everything's going to fall off, but just like one or two turns. Because if you loosen these screws, you can then adjust the door, like putting your hand up top here and putting your leg or your foot against it down here, and you could, since the bottom is not sealing right here, if you pull back just a little bit on the door and push in just a little bit, the door will flex. Then you close the door to see if it seals, and then you do this, the top and the bottom, you move them back and forth till you get it lined up. Once the door seems to line up around the opening pretty carefully, you grab the door, and from about the middle, you pull the door open slowly, and if you do that, it'll return its shape, and then start in one of the corners and then tighten all the screws and work your way all the way around and tighten the screws, and then the door should open and close fine, and you don't need to remove any food off of the shelf. So let's go ahead and continue what he's doing here just for a minute.
So the inner door panel is not so heavy and doesn't all come crashing down as I loosen it off. And then I'm going to loosen off all of these bolts in an effort to try and straighten the door and allow it to be a bit more flat and rest against its frame. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm going around the whole door and I'm going at these bolts and I'm undoing them all a little bit, not taking them whole.
Just a little bit of an adjustment.
Just loosening them all off to try and free up the door so I can try and force the door back. And then with it in that position, I'm tightening all the screws up. Okay, here's after my first attempt, and isn't that interesting? I've made things worse, but I've made them worse on the opposite side. So the basic principle then is good. I'm able to tweak this door. And
so he he loosened all the screws and then he bent the top out more than the bottom, and now he just did the opposite problem. So you don't need to do much of an adjustment when you're moving these doors.
So now I just have to find begins. I got to defrost the freezer, and so I got to take all the food out.
So after once or twice you get this, if the gasket's still not sealing, this is where we use a heat gun. You can use one of those that you buy at Home Depot for about 20, 30 bucks. It's also to remove laminate tile, floor, and everything else. You have to be careful. They get so hot, it'll melt this gasket. So when you're using this tool, you're constantly waving the tool up and down to heat up the gasket. And what I do is I open and close the door as I'm heating the gasket, and the magnet inside will pull the gasket closed and stretch that gasket out to seal the door. So this is just one of the methods for
Are you
sealing
using a
that
heat
door.
gun?
Using a heat gun. So you use the heat gun till it's sealed, and then after you've sealed it, we'll do a demonstration in the class one day. After you sealed it, then what you do is you tell the customer, listen, ma'am, I adjusted and calibrated your gasket to seal around the frame of the door. I need you to not open this door for about an hour or so after I'm gone, because the gasket needs to cool down, because once it cools down, it won't be soft anymore. It'll retain the shape. So a lot of times if I'm going to someone's house and I'm replacing the gasket, you do not take all these screws loose from the door when you're replacing the gasket. Let's go back to that picture for a second, because I got something to add to it. So if you're replacing a gasket that has screws, you only loosen up about this many screws at a time, and you peel the old gasket off and let it hang, and you stick the new gasket in and start tightening it a little bit, not to the very last screw, but maybe up to 3/4 of the way. You tighten it up this far, then you loosen up a little bit more. Pull the old gasket out, tuck the new gasket in, and work your way around. Why do we do it in pieces at a time?
So how do you tuck it in?
What? Say it again?
If the gasket's in the way, how would you be tucking a gasket in?
Well, you take the old one and you peel it off the plastic liner, and it's hanging down. So if we're looking at the door panel like this, well, let me just use a drawing tool here.
Since it's an old gasket, you just cut it in pieces?
Watch. You don't have to cut it. So these are the shelves inside the door, okay? So we're looking at the inside of the door. If we take the screws loose, and I'll just use a different tool. If we loosen all these screws here, okay? The gasket can be pulled out where the screws were loosened. What happens is the screw goes through the plastic liner of the door and into the metal part of the door. Okay? So when you loosen it, you're allowing the plastic to pull away. So when you do that, you take the liner, you pull it away, and then this part of the gasket, you peel it out from here. The gasket's still attached here, but this part of the gasket is going to hang down like this. If I peel it out, it's still attached to the door here and still attached to the door here, but I took my hands all around here and pulled the gasket out and let it hang. So now the gasket's hanging down. This corner was what was once installed here, and it's hanging down. So now I take the new gasket and I tuck it in from here to here. The rest is just hanging down and hanging in my way, but I just tighten up only a few screws. Now what I'll do is I'll take these screws loose, peel off this part of the gasket. Now this part of the gasket is going to be hanging like this. So now that's the old gasket, and I take the new gasket here in this corner here, I move it over to here, tuck it in. Now I start tightening these screws up. So now the new one is installed this much, and the old one is hanging from here. And little by little, I loosen a few, pull the old one out, tuck the new one in. So I can't go right up to the very edge, so I keep doing that. Now, but why do we do it pieces at a time? Why can't I just take all the screws off, take the old gasket off, put the new gasket on? Why do you want to do it in pieces? Because if you take off the gasket all at once, it'll warp, just like the guy's refrigerator gasket that we saw. You saw how the gasket was warped and not sealing at the top or not at the bottom. If you take all these screws loose and you screw it back together again, with the door hanging from the refrigerator or freezer like it was, it's not going to be perfectly square, and then you're going to have to spend 15 minutes loosening and tightening screws to get it to seal. But if you only take off a little portion like this much at a time, the rest of the screws are holding the gasket and the door straight so it does not flex or bend and cause an opening. So,
Richard,
yes.
Does the gasket come with an adhesive, or is it an adhesive that we have to apply ourselves?
There is no adhesive. The older gasket had, the gasket was this thick, but it had a flap in the back. And the door liner, and I'll use a different color, the door liner overlapped the gasket. And the real old ones, the screws went through the plastic liner, through the gasket, and then the door was behind it back here. Okay? So the gasket had to be tucked in behind this. Then what they did is they said, man, in order to take the gasket out, we had to actually remove the entire screw. Otherwise, the plastic was behind that screw. So then they came up with a metal channel. The metal was like this. And then there was a curved piece, and I'm going to try to draw it my best. It was curved like this, and then the top of that channel was here. I don't know if you guys can get an idea of what I'm trying to show you. So across the top, the sides, and the bottom, each side and each top had its own channel, and then the screw holes were in the metal here. The plastic door liner, and I'll use a different color, the plastic door liner was behind this here, and then you had another channel like this one going up and down. So this was the door liner with the shelves inside the freezer, and then this was the actual refrigerator door, and I'll use a different color for that. This was the refrigerator door. And three-dimensional, my drawing's horrible there. Let me just use a straight line. So this was the door. Here was the door. Like this. So the gasket, when we first started doing it, they were putting screw holes right through the gasket, right through the liner, and into the door. So they screwed the gasket in. That was a problem because you had to remove every screw. And we were talking about screws all the way around this door. You could probably have 30 screws, 40 screws. Imagine taking them all out, putting them back in a couple at a time. So what they did here now is they put this metal bracket. The gasket was only connected by this piece of metal, and the gasket went up and over like this. So you had to tuck the gasket in behind the metal. You had to peel the gasket up with your hand so you could tighten the screws. And if you look, this is what the guy was doing in the video. Let me see if I can go back to where he was adjusting the screws. I think it was right
and I'm
here.
going out these bolts, and I'm...
Okay, so you see how he's pushing the gasket back so he can get to the screw. So the other side of this gasket is tucked behind this plastic liner, and then the metal door panels on the other side, the screw went into the metal. The screw did not go through his gasket. So the gasket was just tucked in behind the plastic liner, and when you tighten the screw, the plastic liner helped it. So they removed the metal brackets that I was showing you, removed the metal brackets, and then just created this channel on the plastic liner, and now the gasket was held by the plastic liner. So they went from screw holes to metal support to removing the metal support and just putting the screw holes in the plastic liner to eventually now inside the door there was just a small metal channel. And the metal channel, the gasket just pushes in. I think every single one of the refrigerators in my class now are all just push the gasket into the groove. There is no glue. There is no adhesive. There are no screws. You just pull the gasket out and tuck the new one in. And when it goes inside this channel, it gets pretty tight. So the channel is all the way around the door here and holds the gasket all the way around. Now, I think Frigidaire, we had a problem with some of the door liners and some of the gaskets, and they were telling technicians to put silicone in the channel and silicone the door seal. That works sometimes, sometimes not. So in this gasket, you have to adjust them. You have to make sure that they seal properly when you're done, and they're all held on differently. So you got to try to find some of these older refrigerators so you can see how that gasket's done. Maybe I can find a video of an older unit. Let me just see here. Replacing the refrigerator door. Didn't I just type something? So look at this one here real quick. I'm not going to play the whole video. I'm just going to go to the part where you can see it.
Is right here. It runs up through the.
I don't know why he's pointing that
All the way out. We can cut it the rest of the way.
Now, you don't need to cut the gasket, but what you're seeing right here is the metal door. Here's the plastic liner. See the gaskets tucked in underneath that liner.
Now that we have the door gasket cut, we can pull it out. You want to make sure that you pull straight out this way.
Now, this has no screws, so the liner's glued in. So let me see if I can find another picture here with the screws. These are all the easy ones. That's the easy ones. I haven't found like an old
Hi, I'm
school
Steve
video.
Gonzalez with Smidgen.
Let me see this one here. I can't find any of the older ones with screws. Now see, this guy took the door off. You don't need to take the door off when replacing the door gasket.
Hi, it's
Pedro,
Steve.
do you ever take the door
Today
off
we're
to
going to
change
show
the
you how to
gasket?
change.
He's not there.
Nope.
No.
Put that door aside for now.
No, not again.
Suggest that you do is open the box
Okay, now
immediately.
this one has the
Inspect the
screws.
gasket, make
That
sure
was a
that there's no
one-time thing.
damage or tears in either of the corners.
Now look here. This one has the screws. Let me print screen this and show you guys something. I'm going to zoom in on that just for a second. So if we look at this closely, every one of these dark marks here are the screws. And the gasket goes underneath this plastic liner, and this is the metal outside of the refrigerator door. This is the plastic liner, and you tuck it in and then you tighten these screws. This is not the proper way to do it. Okay? So I just want you guys to see that there's different ways these gaskets are held on. Now when you get brand new gaskets, gaskets come wrinkled, they come twisted, hopefully they're not damaged. But when you go to put them on the door, the heat gun helps reform the gasket, remove those wrinkles. One of the things you want to do is before you install a gasket, take and ask the customer if you can use their sink, block up the sink, and fill it up with hot water and let the gasket soak for about 10-15 minutes in hot water while you're removing the old gasket. Now, before I install the new gasket, I go to the customer, ma'am or sir, I'm going to install this gasket, and when I'm done, I have to seal it and heat it up so it will form to the refrigerator cabinet and seal properly. You're not going to be able to get in here for the next hour or so. Are you going to do any cooking or think that you might need to take something out now so that you don't open up the door for at least an hour after I leave? That way you give the customer an opportunity to take something out instead of them 15 minutes after you leave. Oh man, I forgot I had to take the meat out of the fridge to cook. And they open up the door before the gasket completely cooled down and you lose your seal. So what I usually do is give the customer the option to take something out before I finish installing this door seal here. So let's go back to our presentation. So that was a door gasket. I don't want to spend a lot of time on door gaskets, but You don't need to cut them. You don't need to take the door off the refrigerator when you're installing them. But there are many different ways that you want to install them. Now let's take a look at this problem this guy had. This is another ice problem.
Welcome back, guys. It's the tightwad. More problems that are really bad on the inside, and you can see it's really bad, and it's usually because oxygen is getting into the freezer and creating this frost, so it covers everything.
It's not oxygen. It's warm air with humidity. It's the humidity, not the oxygen.
Moisture.
It's moisture, humidity. It's the same thing. But he's saying oxygen. He's trying to say air is getting in, but it's really the humidity in the air. So let's make sure we
everything in here. And the worse it builds up, the more problems it causes. The frost is caused by the door not sealing properly. So the most likely culprit is that something is either lodged behind the door or the seal itself is worn out. I can see this side looks like it's sealed good, but I'll show you a couple of ways to check and see if it's sealing. And on this side, I can already tell that this is not lining up correctly. You can see the door is not closing properly. I can see back in here that I can reach my whole fingers inside. I can pull it open from the side here.
Now, one way to check a gasket, I don't know if he's going to do the dollar bill test, is you close the door on a dollar bill. Now, gaskets are not so strong that if you pull on the bill, it won't come out. That's a given. It's going to pull right out. But what you want to do is just lightly tug on it. If you tug on it, it should give a little bit of resistance and the whole bill shouldn't just fly right out. If you tug on it, and what you want to do is close the door about halfway on the bill, like on the face of George Washington, for example, and you tug on it lightly, just keep tugging on it. If the gasket, it's sort of like someone else got two fingers holding the other end of it, as you're tugging it through their fingers, then that's a good seal. So when we're done with this class, if you guys can, take a dollar bill and do the dollar bill test on your refrigerator door. Put it in between the door and the gasket at different points and tug on it. If it comes out real easy with one, maybe two pulls, the whole bill comes right out, either you're pulling too hard or your door seal's not sealing properly. If it tugs and gives a little bit of resistance, remember the gasket has a magnet. So just imagine if you took a dollar bill and put it up against a refrigerator and stuck a magnet on the other side of the dollar bill, you tried to pull it, you could pull it off, but the magnet's sort of like pushing against the refrigerator. Now, the gaskets have a magnet in them. They're not as strong as like our microwave magnets that we use in class, but it should tug on it and should hold on it. So get used to doing that kind of method. So one of the assignments I want you guys to do tonight is to take a bill and stick it in between the door and tug on it and see how it seals. So let's keep going here. So now, real quick before he goes any further, remember he said something is not allowing the gasket to seal. This is a basket, and sometimes if someone puts something too high in the basket, it could fall down behind the basket, and when they close the door, it's preventing the basket from going all the way back. That could be a problem too.
Pull out this door here. I can see that there's some ice buildup right here that is hitting on the door right here. That could be the main reason why it's not closing. That could have been a buildup from one of their kids leaving the door unlocked at one time, and this could be the whole reason why it's still occurring. So let's try to get this off of here, and then we'll see if the door shuts completely. It's hard to get a good angle on what I'm doing, but I just have a...
Do not. I think that's funny. Don't use a knife. What did I say I used to break ice? The back end?
Back end of a screwdriver.
Yeah, use the back end of a screwdriver. It's got a little weight. It's plastic against plastic. That guy is pushing against that ice with a knife. And either the customer has an older unit with a porcelain liner, stainless steel liner. That metal knife's going to scratch it. That's a plastic liner. If he pushes on that ice and that ice cracks, he could go in and crack the plastic liner of the door. That is not a good method to remove the ice. We want to take and just lightly tap on it and go tap, 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 tap. and get that ice to crack and break. If not, get your heat source. Heat it up a little bit. It's going to come right off.
A butter knife, and I'm going to scrape that ice off of there. Make sure I get it all off of there so the door will close smoothly.
So, do you think he's carrying a butter knife in his tool bag, or he's using the customer's butter knife to do this? Don't use a knife. I had another video where a guy was using a metal putty to remove the ice underneath that. Remember I showed you that drain pan that had the ice in the hole earlier? The guy was taking and going underneath the drain pan with that metal putty knife. You're going to damage something with a metal putty knife. Try at all costs not to use something metal on these plastic liners. That right there is dangerous.
And see.
Heat it up. Pour some water.
That's
Use
our
some
problem.
towels on the floor
clean off the inside part of the door as well
to keep it to melt it off.
And now I'm going to shut the door again, closing completely on this side. And I wonder if the tracks that the door rides on might be bent. A lot of times kids will lean or stand on this part because they want to reach something higher, and it bends these tracks right here. When these tracks get bent, it makes it so that the door will no longer close correct.
Now, if that track bent, what do you think the biggest problem would be? If a customer had bent tracks,
it won't slide in properly again.
You wouldn't be able to open and close the door, period. That guy was able to slide it in and out very easily. A bent track would make it hard to slide in and out. Now, if we go back just a little bit in our video, I don't know if he shows it. Let me see if I can find it. Right here where the track meets the door, there's usually some screws upper and lower and 2 screws here. They can adjust the door. So you can take the door, and I'll go back to my drawing tool for real quick here. Let me just clear this out. So if this is the cabinet here, okay, and then this is the door right here, and let's say the door, the top of it is, that wasn't a good drawing, but let's say the top of the door is bent this way a little bit, okay? So when you go to close, the top will hit the refrigerator, but the bottom won't. The screws that are in this area will allow you to push this side back and square it up. So what you would do is the same thing I said earlier about adjusting the gasket by loosening the screws and getting it to seal. You loosen the screws on both sides of the door where the track meets the door, and then you'll open and close the door till you get the bottom and the top of the door to line up. Then you would grab the door with both hands. You'll put one hand on this side, and then the other side, if this was the door going all the way out like this, let's just say this was the door and then this was the opening of the cabinet here. Okay, so this is the inside of the freezer. You would put one hand on either side of the door, and you would slowly pull out. We'd pull out right from the middle about where the track is so we don't cause the top to lean back or the bottom to lean back and we lost our alignment. So we slowly pull it out without any force so we don't mess up the adjustment, and then we tighten those screws down to retain its shape, and now open and close the door and see if it seals. Now one thing he didn't show you is on the top of the door, you open up the 2 refrigerator doors, the French doors, and you can look down and see the gasket. The only part of the gasket you can normally not see on this unit is the very bottom. You remove the lower grill and you use an inspection mirror that is used by a sealed system technician, and I'll show you what one of those are. And you can look up with a flashlight and inspection mirror to see if the gasket's sealing. Or you can just feel with your fingers. Now these are different types of inspection mirrors. This is a nice one because it has LED lights on the end of it. So you don't need a separate flashlight, but it has some lights on it for 25 bucks. And this is a telescoping pole, so you can extend it, and you can just go right underneath the refrigerator door and see if the gasket's sealing. Okay. So
the larger grommet. We're gonna go ahead.
Oh wait, that wasn't the same one here.
These tracks right here. When these tracks get bent. You can do the dollar bill test on these type refrigerators because there's supposed to be a good seal between here and here. So if you put a dollar bill in,
watch how it tugs
shut
on
it. It should pull a little bit as you're pulling it out. That'll let you know you're getting a good seal.
Yeah, I said that earlier. I told customers if they have a $100 bill, it's too thick. I'm kidding. But you can use any bill, $20 bill, $100 bill, but we called it a dollar bill test, and that's way old school back in the 70s and 80s when I was working on these appliances. That's how you would check to see if the door gasket is actually sealing.
So that side's fine. But if we come over here to this side and put our dollar bill in,
You want to go about halfway.
nothing is holding it. I can actually go in and out with it.
You see, so that's
So
not
it's
a
still
good
an
seal.
issue on this side. And even if I push in on it, it still doesn't lock. So the next possible culprit is that something fell in behind everything.
I said that also. I haven't watched this
I'm
video.
going to remove the top drawer from the freezer by lifting up on the front, pull it all the way out, lift up on the front, and it disengages from the tracks, and then it just lifts right out. Now I'm going to remove this bottom drawer. It actually does reverse, where I slide it backwards a little bit first, and then lift it out.
Those are not easy to take out, by the way. Practice that.
And see if it shuts better with nothing in it. Now it's sealing good.
Now, one
So
thing
maybe some.
One thing I would have done with this dollar bill test is I would have tested the bottom of the door with the dollar bill and the top of the door. If the bottom of the door was sealing properly and the top not, it may have been warped like I did in my drawing where part of it is touching and the other part is not.
Track, because now it's sealed.
Did you guys notice how that door at the last second pulled itself in? Some of these tracks have springs that help pull the door closed tight to create a better seal.
Feeling good. I can't slide the bill up or down. Go again this way. Still good here.
Okay, we determined it's not sealing. So, did he fix it?
So let's put everything back together and see what we got. Alright, so slide the front lip under first, and then that settles in. Let's try closing it. Try a dollar bill with just the bottom. Steel ceiling.
He didn't show what he did. Okay, but I'd like you guys tonight after the class is if you get a chance, get a dollar bill and test the gaskets around your door and see if they're sealing. One of the biggest problems that we have with door gaskets is door gaskets get ripped and damaged, usually in the bottom right-hand corner. Does anybody know why these gaskets normally rip or get torn? It's not because it's a defect in the gasket. It's usually because the custom... I'm sorry, say that again. You like broke up.
The shipping box, is that like where the opening is, or like where it starts, where it was, like where it's put together?
No, actually what happens is someone probably spilled soda or juice or something sticky got between the gasket and the cabinet of the machine. You gotta fix your microphone, bro. Okay, something got between the cabinet and the machine and the gasket, and every time they open and close the door, it's sticky, so the gasket is being like putting tape or glue between the gasket and the cabinet, and it starts tearing. And a lot of times customers have extended contracts or it's under warranty, and they say, oh, I need a new gasket. ma'am, I mean, you can go ahead and change gasket forward, not say anything, but technically, ma'am, this gasket was damaged because you spilled something, and because you didn't clean it and didn't take care of your product, it went bad. And we need to make sure that that's clean. And if you open up the door and it sounds like someone ripping tape off of the cabinet, like it's sticky. So if you do install a new gasket after the old one was torn like that, you need to make sure that that customer or you clean it, or otherwise you're going to come back there and change the gasket again in a couple of months or a couple of weeks, depending on how bad it is. But gaskets get torn because customers do not take care of their product. Not everybody. There's a lot of customers that are very clean, but something spills, maybe one of their kids spill it, and they don't know the kid spills it, but they don't pay attention to the noise when they open and close the door. When you open and close the door, you're not supposed to hear the gasket ripping or making this like tape peeling off of a box type kind of noise. So these are different problems that we're going to have with ice buildup in the refrigerator. This all ties into like, do I have a defrost problem? Do I have a sealed system problem? Do I have a gasket problem? Let's take a look at this problem here. I got one more video real quick and
Go ahead
talk
and
about
remove
this.
loosen the screws on the door here.
Okay.
Do is open it up and see what we've got. All right, so we got a layer of ice down at the bottom of the freezer here, which is an indication that the drain line itself is going to be frozen. So
Okay, so remember that one picture I showed you with the ice inside the hole in the evaporator. Let me see if I can find that picture in the presentation here real quick. This one right here. This right above it is the evaporator. When it goes into defrost, any ice that melts runs into this pan. This pan is angled to force this water to here, and this drops into the refrigerator and then drops out the back to the compressor into a drain pan down below there. Now, if this is frozen, the water that drips will eventually run forward. GE and some of the other manufacturers, the side-by-side, if their drain line clogs up, the water will run into the bottom of the freezer and then freeze up a thin layer of solid ice in the bottom of the freezer. And then eventually the customer says, hey, every now and then I see water on the floor by my freezer door. Someone might think it's a dispenser dripping or the fill tube line that runs up to that bottom hinge is leaking. It may be that the defrost is frozen like this and it's running out the door every time it defrosts. So let's go back to that video.
So what we're going to have to do is get behind the back panel there, clear the drain line, and we're going to want to replace the grommet on the back side with a larger grommet. We're going to go.
So I'm going to speed this up. I'm not going to go through the actual taking all the shelves out. Look at the work you have to go through to take all these shelves out. The manufacturer needs to find an easier way to take this apart.
On the very top of this.
And you can't see what he's taking out, but that's where the airflow comes out.
So that's where your two tabs are. What you're doing is sticking your screwdriver through and depressing the tab.
So let's get a little bit farther. Okay. Here we go. He got the back cover off finally.
Just like that. And as you can see, we've got a buildup of ice underneath this drain pan here. Looks like it's probably just got done defrosting, or just started a defrost cycle. There's a lot of water back there. But we're just going to break up all that ice, and then we're going to replace the drain grommet. Alright, just going to get...
Stop. He's using a metal spatula or metal putty knife. He can make a hole, he could damage something, he could scratch that liner up. Now I know a plastic putty knife is not strong enough to get a lot of this ice up. Keep 1 or 2 beach towels on your truck, lay them in the bottom of the freezer here, take some hot water or some water and pour some water here. It'll only take a minute or 2 to loosen this ice up, and then with a plastic putty knife you can lift it up. If you use hot enough water, you'll be able to clear the drain. It looks like that one picture of the drain line that I showed you.
All the ice at the bottom kind of cleared off first here.
So you see what he was using the back end of that putty knife to break the ice on the bottom? Now he's scraping it with a metal putty knife. That's not good. You'll scratch
All right,
the
and I'm
bottom.
gonna take my
of the
putty
unit.
knife.
And here's what I said about putting a towel here. Just pour hot water. Or use your heat, not your heat gun, but like, remember I said yesterday, like using the air sled, using the heat of it to loosen the ice up and use a putty knife to break it loose.
Go right up underneath the back panel. Or the drain pan, I mean, I'm sorry. And just sort of move it up and down. Break
So I'm
up
going to go a little bit farther.
where your drain line's at. And kind of just get that drain line thawed out.
So that's a pretty neat idea. So what he's doing is he's taking like a turkey baster and he's sucking up the water and then shooting the water back down onto the ice in that one little hole. And he's keep doing it till he gets that ice to melt. This will take about 5 or 10 minutes. It's probably the toughest part of the job besides taking the door off. Use hot water. Put it in the microwave in a cup.
Alright, now that we've got all the ice cleared out from the inside here, we're going to go to the back side where the drain grommet comes through. Plug now.
So let's speed this up.
I got it off and you can hear all the water just run right down into the drain pan. What you got is it's almost just gunked up and sticky. So if you look, the grommet's just dirty and really sticky. Like the heat of the compressor almost makes them just really kind of stick closed, and the water drains through here. The grommet just prevents warm air from coming up in and lets the water drain out. So we're going to put a new grommet on there because that one's obviously restricting the water flow.
Now, the reason why he's doing it, and I haven't followed up on it, I'm going to look it up. I think Whirlpool might have put a service flash or something out that drain was probably backing up, and they probably redesigned the grommet, because if he says he's putting a bigger grommet, you're not going to be able to order a bigger grommet unless the manufacturer had designed a bigger grommet. You know, you're not just going to say, oh, I'll just order a bigger one. You can't get parts that for an appliance and look up the model number and say, well, you know, that screw doesn't fit that hole anymore. I'm just going to go on the model number and find a bigger screw. They're not going to give you the part if it didn't come with it from the manufacturer. So him saying that it might replace this grommet, it might have been a design change by the manufacturer on this unit.
So we've got our new grommet here. Looks about the same, but just not as sticky.
Now some of them build up with algae.
It slides
from the
right up
heat.
onto the drain line. It's going to go basically front to back, be facing.
Now, the reason why it's closed up like that is because what they're trying to prevent is warm air from down here going up into the freezer. That'll create excessive frost. So that device is like a check valve. It lets water come out, but it tries to prevent warm air
Like
from
that.
coming in.
And just kind of stick your hand up there.
So he's training
Almost right in line.
the drain grommet there, and you're not really going to see it.
You got to reach behind, grab your...
But one thing I'd like to do is I want,
Okay, now
before I put this back panel on, and I have the whole refrigerator open, get a cup, small amount of water, pour it from the top down to make sure it flows good, then go to the back and put your hand around that grommet and make sure that it's not leaking. Because here he put that grommet in, we're going to put the whole refrigerator back together again, and look, this customer's on wooden floors. If you do not test it, make sure it's not leaking, what do you think is going to happen if if either it wasn't installed right, or as he was taking his hand out, he hit up against it and just knocked it loose? Now he's going to have a problem and damage these floors, so it's going to be an expensive repair. So when you guys do a repair like that,
Kind of warp
test
the
it.
floors.
I'm sorry? What'd you say?
I was just saying, if enough water leaks, it'll warp the floor.
It'll damage the floor. If it's laminate or wood, it's going to damage the floor, and the customer's going to say, well, everything was fine until you pulled it out and serviced it. And they're going to have a record that you were out there and did it. Now they
We're just
might
gonna
not
go
see it because it's behind the fridge, but if it leaked enough where water's coming forward, now you pull the fridge out and the customer sticks their head back there and sees the floor damaged. Now you're liable for it.
back to the front side, put everything back together, and that.
So
last,
basically, he's just putting it all back
slide
together
the
again.
top screw that's closest to you.
So what we discussed today wasn't a total sealed system problem. I'm going to next week do some more sealed system with dual evaporators and three-way valves, and talk about their operation and talk about what to look for and how do we approach those for service. All right.